A man in a fake security vest points his gun at my 78-year-old grandfather who's just watering his garden. I freeze in horror from my spot on the driveway. My trembling fingers send a text to my FBI uncle, "Gun grandpa now." His reply, "I will be there in 5 minutes." Sirens wail. My mom screams. 2 black SUVs screech to a halt, and my uncle's FBI team jumps out with weapons ready. The fake security guard's face turns white. His gun shakes in his hand. Freeze frame. Yep, that's me. The guy whose quiet neighborhood turned into a war zone, all because of a fake HOA cop with a power trip. Before we start this crazy story, please comment which country you're watching from and don't forget to subscribe. I was living in my mom's old house, helping take care of my grandfather while job hunting. Life was supposed to be peaceful here. My grandpa is a soft-spoken Korean War veteran who loves his garden. At 78, he spends most of his days making sure his flowers are perfect. The neighborhood was meant to be a quiet retirement community where he could enjoy his golden years. After Mom passed away, I moved in to help him out. Between my burnout from grad school and the tough job market, it seemed like the right thing to do. Little did I know our peaceful life was about to be turned upside down by someone who thought she owned the whole neighborhood. The problem started with small things. A note here, a complaint there. But they grew into something dangerous that none of us saw coming. And it all centered around one woman who decided she was in charge, even though nobody ever asked her to be. Our neighborhood's nightmare had a name, Karen. Picture this, blonde bob haircut, clipboard always in hand, and a voice that could crack glass. She carried a purse big enough to fit a small satellite dish and walked around like she owned every inch of concrete. Karen appointed herself as president of the Neighborhood Standards Committee, which didn't actually exist. She claimed we were all part of a homeowners association HOA, but here's the thing, we weren't. There was no official document, no board, no city approval. Just Karen, her printer, and her belief that she was born to rule. At first it seemed harmless. Notes taped to doors about trash cans not being lined up perfectly. Passive-aggressive comments about paint colors on garden sheds. Grandpa just laughed it off. He'd survived war. Karen's font choice on her fake citations wasn't going to shake him. But then Karen found a boyfriend, Ken. Ken wore camo cargo shorts and a vest that said, "Security," even though nobody hired him. His sunglasses were so dark he probably saw through walls with them. He strutted around like he'd watched too many cop shows, but had absolutely no legal authority. The worst part? Ken carried a gun. Not openly at first, but you could see it bulging under his vest. A secret he desperately wanted everyone to notice. The first time I met Ken, he was walking through the neighborhood yelling into a walkie-talkie. Alone. Talking to nobody. I was trimming our hedges when he stopped and asked, "Do you have a permit for that tool?" I blinked in confusion. "You mean the hedge clippers?" He nodded like I just admitted to a crime. Manual cutting tools can pose a safety risk if not properly maintained. HOA regulations require annual inspection. What HOA? There was no HOA. But Ken and Karen were determined to make us believe there was one, and things were about to get much worse than fake citations and hedge clipper permits. A week later, we got our first official notice of violation. Apparently, Grandpa's American flag in the flower bed was excessively patriotic and could trigger international tensions. I'm not joking. Karen had printed those exact words in Comic Sans font. Then came noise complaints about Grandpa's sprinkler. The thing barely made a sound. I recorded it and compared the volume to a whisper. Ken didn't care. He said Grandpa's weaponized water distribution was disruptive to community auditory harmony. When I asked what that meant, he offered me a citation and a pamphlet titled, "Understanding Tactical Landscaping." I wanted to ignore them, but Grandpa was starting to feel harassed. He loved that garden. It was the last thing he and Grandma built together before she passed away. Seeing him hesitate before turning on his hose made my blood boil. So I started documenting everything, videos, photos, and timestamps of all their nonsense. I created a folder called HOA Hell's Cape and backed everything up to the cloud. Little did I know I'd soon need all that evidence. One morning I noticed our water pressure acting strange. The utility bills went up and Grandpa's tomato plants started dying because of inconsistent water flow. Something was definitely wrong. After some investigating, I discovered the unthinkable. Karen had decided to install a community irrigation system. But instead of getting proper permits or using actual community funds, she and Ken had secretly connected underground pipes from properties with private wells, including ours. They tapped into Grandpa's private well, the one he installed himself decades ago, without asking anyone. What? To water Karen's newly planted Zen zone, a ridiculous rose maze in her backyard. When I confronted Karen, she just smiled and said, "We're all in this together. Water sharing is the neighborly thing to do. No lady stealing from a veteran and calling it neighborly is not okay." I checked the system and found they'd installed a backflow preventer, badly. That's when I came up with my plan for revenge. I rigged it so that instead of drawing clean water from our well, her garden line pulled from a secondary tank I filled with gray water, old dishwater, laundry rinse, and a little help from the septic pump. I called it community compost tea, and let it marinate. Karen never noticed as her roses started browning and her maze got soggy. She blamed airborne toxins from a nearby barbecue. I smiled. I waited. Then I flushed the whole system. 2 hours after I flushed the system, Karen was in her backyard screaming at Ken to do something. Her precious rose maze had started to smell like a swamp, and the center had turned into a muddy pit of sewage-fed root rot. The stench was so bad I saw a raccoon actually vomit nearby. Ken, determined to fix the situation, marched over to our property with fists clenched. He demanded to inspect our infrastructure. His face was red with anger, and I could see the outline of his gun under his vest. Grandpa was just watering his lilies, completely unaware of what was happening. He looked up, confused as Ken stormed toward him. That's when Ken snapped. He pulled out his pistol and shouted those words that changed everything, "Get on the ground." My grandpa stood frozen, hose still dripping in his hands. My mom burst through the front door screaming. I ducked behind the mailbox and hit record on my phone. My phone buzzed with a text from my uncle, an FBI counterterrorism division agent. He'd been following our HOA saga ever since I told him about Karen and Ken during Thanksgiving dinner. I sent him the 3-word text, "Gun Grandpa now." He replied that he'd be there in 5 minutes. Ken had no idea what was coming. He thought he had all the power. He thought we were scared, and for a few seconds we were. But then we heard the engines roar. 2 black SUVs screeched to a halt in front of our house. Doors flew open and my uncle stepped out with his team. They were fully geared up, weapons ready, and completely professional. Karen screamed from across the street. Ken froze, the gun in his hand shaking uncontrollably. As the FBI ordered him to drop his weapon, I saw the garden hose slip from Grandpa's grip and hit Ken right in the shin with a final splash. You want to know what poetic justice tastes like? It tastes a lot like swamp water. But just when I thought the show was over, one of the FBI agents pulled out a folder, looked at Karen and said, "Ma'am, you're under investigation too. And it's not just about the water." Wait, what? Everyone always thinks the story ends when the bad guy gets tackled, cuffed, and shoved into the back of a federal vehicle. Neighbors clapped, Karen screamed, and paramedics checked Grandpa's blood pressure. But that was just the opening act. While Ken sat pouting in the back of a federal SUV like a toddler denied ice cream, the FBI agents weren't packing up and leaving. They were just getting started. One of them opened a thick folder, flipped through a few pages, and turned to Karen with a calm, surgical politeness that made her visibly nervous. "Ma'am, can we speak to you about your financial activities related to the homeowners association?" he asked. Karen blinked like she'd been slapped with a fish. "What financial activities?" Her voice climbed to near operatic levels of panic. The agent didn't smile or blink. "We have records of monetary exchanges, unregistered dues collections, and potentially fraudulent documentation. We'd like to clarify a few things." Just like that, the queen of the fake HOA became the main character in a federal interrogation. I wasn't expecting the FBI to take that turn. I figured they'd arrest Ken, maybe take his toy gun away, and give Karen a fine for pretending her printer gave her legal authority. But apparently, when you run around collecting thousands in fake dues, threaten seniors into handing over their pension money, and falsify government-style documents, you trip a whole different set of legal wires. The investigation kicked off right on the front lawn, in front of Karen's now rotting rose maze. Agents began taking pictures of the fake HOA regulation signs she'd nailed to street light poles and tree trunks. One agent found the Community Standards Enforcement Manual Karen had written herself. It was printed in color, laminated, and included gems like, "All patriotic displays must be approved for tone and aesthetic, and only pastel colors are permitted for outdoor furniture. Bright red chairs incite unrest." Then came the door-to-door interviews. Turns out Karen and Ken had been busy. Over 6 months, they'd convinced at least 15 residents, most of them elderly, that there was a new HOA mandate requiring biannual neighborhood enhancement contributions, fancy talk for, "Give us money or we'll make your life hell." They had fee sheets with bogus legal jargon, fake city approval stamps, and even an electronic payment system that routed straight into an account under Karen's maiden name. Mr. Donnelly, who lived 2 houses down and could barely hear his own microwave beep, had been paying $300 every 3 months. When the agents told him it was all fake, he started crying, not because of the money, but because he thought he'd done something wrong by not following the rules. The FBI's investigation into Karen and Ken's operation grew deeper by the hour. What started as one man pointing a gun at my grandfather had unraveled into a complex web of neighborhood fraud. Another neighbor, sweet Mrs. Patel, had been forced to repaint her house at her own expense because Karen declared the shade of yellow she'd used too emotionally intense. The poor woman spent nearly $5,000 on painting costs because she was afraid of breaking rules that never actually existed. But the backflow incident was what really sealed their fate. Karen and Ken hadn't just tapped into our private well. They had connected to 3 others as well, using a maze of underground hoses, half-buried PVC piping, and what looked suspiciously like leftover parts from a kiddie pool pump. One of the wells had been contaminated, another nearly drained dry. It was pure luck that nobody got seriously sick from their amateur plumbing network. The FBI photographed it all. They took soil samples and even dug up part of Karen's Zen maze to trace the piping, which she protested with screams of "You're violating my sanctuary." No one cared. Ken meanwhile was in for a rough ride. Turns out his little pistol wasn't just unlicensed. It had been reported stolen 3 years earlier from a pawn shop 2 states over. Combine that with impersonating law enforcement, brandishing a weapon, and multiple counts of elder harassment, and Ken was looking at serious prison time. But the icing on the cake? His fake security certification. He'd printed it himself and misspelled certified twice. Back at our house, Grandpa sat on the porch sipping sweet tea like a man who'd just survived a hurricane. He looked calm, but I could tell he was shaken, not by Ken, not even by the gun, but by the sheer audacity of someone who could walk into a peaceful community and twist it into a neighborhood dictatorship overnight. He kept shaking his head, muttering, "All that noise over a hose." That night, I uploaded all the footage, not just Ken pulling the gun, but the whole saga. The fake signs, the bogus citations, the HOA threats, even Karen's TED Talk-style speech about restoring moral balance to cul-de-sacs. I cut it together like a documentary, added sarcastic captions and dramatic music. I called it Karen's Cult: How a Suburban Dictator Tried to Militarize a Garden Gnome. By morning it had 50,000 views. By noon 200,000. Local news called, then a national blog picked it up. My inbox exploded with messages. "Can you come on our podcast? Can we do a segment? Will Grandpa do an interview?" Grandpa said no to all of them, but he did let me record him saying one sentence: "I just wanted to water my lilies." That clip went viral all by itself. But just when I thought everything was winding down, Ken locked up, Karen facing charges, the neighborhood finally breathing again, I opened our mailbox and found a letter. Not typed, but handwritten in neat block letters on fancy monogram stationery. It was addressed to me and read, "You've embarrassed the wrong people. This isn't over. The board." The board? There was no board. Which meant someone, some other person, wanted to take Karen's place and they just made the worst mistake of their life. The envelope sat on our kitchen table like a loaded mousetrap. Grandpa glanced at it once, shook his head, and went back to peeling an apple with his pocket knife. My mom was already pacing, muttering about restraining orders and security cameras. But me? I just stared at the letter and laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was stupid. Gloriously, aggressively stupid. After everything that had gone down, Karen getting exposed to 500,000 people online and Ken being hauled away by actual federal agents, some mystery person still had the nerve to try reviving the HOA nonsense like a bad movie sequel. I kept the letter, of course, tucked it into my HOA hellscape folder and scanned it. It didn't have fingerprints, already checked with Grandpa's old hobby kit from his days teaching at the police auxiliary, but it did smell of desperation and lavender. Whoever this person was, they were trying to sound official. The letterhead was fancy with some kind of embossed crest that looked suspiciously like clip art of an eagle holding a rake. It wasn't signed with a name, just "the board." The message was short but full of veiled threats. "You've interfered with established operations, and the neighborhood cannot tolerate rule breakers." My personal favorite line was, "This will escalate if you continue your antagonism." Antagonism? I printed out the letter and taped it to the fridge like a kindergarten drawing. Then I poured myself a cup of coffee and started digging. If someone wanted a war, I'd give them one. And this time, I wasn't just documenting, I was hunting. First step was figuring out who might be dumb enough to try resurrecting Karen's failed HOA. I started with the neighborhood gossip mill. Retirement communities don't run on electricity, they run on porch talk and dog walking intel. I made small talk with Mrs. Alvarez while she walked her Yorkie. I helped Mr. Lynn haul a stubborn trash bin. And the whispers were already flying. Someone had been going door to door with a petition to re-establish order. This mysterious figure claimed they were filling the leadership vacuum left by Karen's removal. But the real kicker? They said they had federal connections. That made me pause. Either they were lying to sound scary or they were referring to the fact that my uncle, the actual FBI agent, had recently visited our neighborhood. The idea that someone might counter that with their own law enforcement cosplay was both hilarious and dangerous. I ran surveillance the old-fashioned way: Ring doorbells, security cameras, motion-activated lights. Several neighbors still had their feeds shared on the neighborhood network. After combing through hours of footage, I spotted something interesting. A man in his mid-40s with a receding hairline and smug walk, holding a clipboard and wearing a polo shirt with the letters NCC embroidered on the chest. I cross-referenced timestamps and figured out who he visited. Then I went knocking myself. Most people were tight-lipped and nervous. One even said, "I don't want any more trouble." But eventually someone cracked. A sweet old guy with nothing left to lose told me the visitor's name: Craig Donaldson. Craig lived on the far edge of the neighborhood, worked in private security, and claimed he was starting the Neighborhood Compliance Council. Apparently, Karen had handed him all her documents before. Things went south, and now he was trying to restructure the whole operation with legitimacy and discretion. Translation: he wanted to take over the scam and make it look legal. I paid Craig a visit, not to confront him, just to see his operation. His house screamed, "Control freak." Flags, surveillance signs, and a custom doormat that said, "Respect my rules or leave." I dropped a flyer in his mailbox that read, "Fake HOAs are illegal. Ask your lawyer before pretending to be the law." I signed it, FBI family, because if he wanted to throw around federal connections, I was happy to match that energy. Craig wasn't just posturing. He started mailing out NCC bulletins to the entire neighborhood, demands disguised as memos, compliance check reminders, voluntary noise surveys, and even a schedule for patio aesthetic evaluations. It was Karen all over again, but now with a guy who probably narrated his own life like a Tom Clancy novel. The turning point came when Grandpa received a letter demanding he remove his American flag garden stone. Not even the actual flag, just a garden stone, because it violated visual uniformity expectations. Grandpa stared at it for 10 seconds, then called my uncle. I don't know what was said, but the next morning Craig's mailbox mysteriously disappeared. One minute it was there, the next just a pile of shattered plastic with a piece of duct tape that said nope. But Craig didn't back down. He escalated. One evening, Grandpa went to turn on the garden lights, and the entire circuit popped, fried, melted from the inside out. An electrician confirmed someone had tampered with the wiring. Dangerous, stupid, and illegal. That night, I set up cameras everywhere. Not just outside, but disguised trail cams, motion detectors, and battery-powered sensors. 4 days later, I caught Craig sneaking into our backyard at 2 a.m. with a flashlight and measuring tape, photographing our fence. I called my uncle again, and this time we weren't just going to arrest a fake cop, we were going to dismantle a whole shadow government. When the agents arrived at Craig's house, they didn't come with sirens blazing. It was calm, quiet, surgical. Craig opened the door wearing a headset and holding a clipboard like he was managing a war game. The evidence was overwhelming: harassment, impersonation of a municipal officer, and possible fraud. The neighborhood finally turned on him. Within days, houses hung flags, garden signs, and Halloween decorations. One guy painted his mailbox neon green and installed a speaker that played circus music when opened. Grandpa built a new planter box with the words, "Liberty grows here," carved into the side. We set it right in the middle of our lawn and surrounded it with flowers. It became a neighborhood symbol. A letter arrived from the city, a commendation. They wanted to use our story as a case study for training municipal enforcement officers on how to detect and dismantle predatory neighborhood schemes. Every Sunday now, a small group gathers by Grandpa's porch with lemonade, lawn chairs, and stories. They call it Liberty Hour. No president, no dues, no rules. Just neighbors being a community. And if you listen closely, sometimes you'll still hear that garden hose turn on in the evening, a quiet hiss across the lilies, and Grandpa's voice saying softly, "This is how you keep things blooming." Justice, as it turns out, grows best when watered with a little patience, a little stubbornness, and just the right amount of petty revenge.